It really is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Lynne Maureen Hurdle to the Intimate Marriage Podcast. I have a lot of different things to say about why you're here, but I wonder if you'd like to just share a little bit about who you are and where you've been, what you bring to the table in your own words.
Oh, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having me. And hello to everyone who is joining, watching, listening. I am thrilled that you are here. I am Dr. Lynne Maureen Hurdle. I am from the Bronx, born, raised, and I have been fortunate enough through my work to have traveled the world helping people to have productive conversations around conflict. I've been doing this for over 40 years. I've started working first in schools and nonprofits, and now in the corporate space, and then as an entrepreneur doing my own work in a program around race, which I know we will talk about later. But I am
Yes, I just want to say that I've looked into it and I almost signed up. It's not the right time, but it is on my agenda for the future.
Awesome. And I hope that it will be on the agenda for a lot of people in the future, because it has turned out to be quite a phenomenal and life-changing experience. So what I do, right, is I teach people the skills to engage in conflict. Most of us run from it. And I really want to give people the confidence to know that they can stay in conversation even when conflict comes up, because conflict is inevitable. We want to talk about intimate relationships. Well, conflict is one of the most intimate that we can have, because conflict's very personal, the way that we engage in it, the feelings that it brings up in us, the people that we tend to be in conflict with, all of that can be a very intimate experience in its own right. I am also a recent widow. My husband, Warren Johnson Price, he was a social worker, but also involved very much. We met in the conflict resolution field. So he was a conflict resolution strategist as well, a social worker, and then very, very much committed to the work of anti-racism. And I am a mother of two amazing sons. Jabari's 27, about to be 28, and Justin Naeem is literally about to be 22 in April. So, this will air a little bit after, but yes. And I have been extremely committed to looking at conflict in all of its forms, because I've always been interested in difference, not because difference is a negative, which I think is a real hard spin that we have in the culture. I've been interested in difference because I think it's pretty cool that people do things in different ways and have different perspectives and different norms and traditions, because I feel like that then adds to who all of us are. And right away, early in my career, I knew that conflict and culture were very much tied to one another. They sat on top of each other. I call them cousins, because there is so much in terms of difference that brings us to the table that can create conflict, which doesn't have to be bad, but it's there, right? And we are not talking about those things on a regular basis. And so I've enjoyed doing my work for a very long time. I meet all kinds of people from all different spaces, and I get to be led into their intimate conversations around conflict.
Right. Sometimes it gets intimate before anyone realizes that has happened. So I want to just convey a bunch of different reasons why I'm really glad you're here in this conversation. First of all, we met at an event, at a dinner at Jen Kem's. I'm not sure if it was 2018, possibly 2019, but in any case, I remember the way in which you spoke of your husband. I don't actually remember what you said, but I'm getting emotional because it's just not that common for me to hear people speak of their spouses with a kind of clarity and a deep respect that is boundaried, but also generous with the intimacy that's there. And So whatever it is that you said about your man, it just went in my heart as a special experience, because I want most people to think of their spouses that way based on having those kinds of experiences. So it really stuck out to me. Another reason that you're here is that we were celebrating Jen Kem's birthday together. And before you gave a magnificent presentation, Jen was so funny as she said, I don't know anybody in the world who loves conflict, but Lynne does. And I, anyway, was interested to hear what you had to say, but I really perked up because I think one of the essential elements in having an intimate, juicy, nourishing marriage is learning how to use conflict to create connection. So many people think the answer is to avoid conflict. And as far as I'm concerned, that leads to conflict-free, passion-free relationships. And I'm not a fan of conflict for conflict's sake, but I'm a big fan of what I'll call authentic conflict in relationships. So this right there is enough for us to be having a conversation. But in addition, I want to say a few more things. One is that I have been privileged to coach quite a number of biracial couples, and where mostly it's with one person being Black or African American and the other person being white or European heritage, whatever it is, sometimes the man, sometimes the woman. And I've noticed that they've had the conversation that they're going to have about race typically earlier in the relationship. And then it tends to go away because it's just understood and they're operating together. And so there have been times when I've brought race into the couples coaching because I perceive it to be playing out in a particular way. And I think there's a way in which biracial couples can think they've handled those issues. And maybe they have, maybe they haven't. And so I hope to learn from you on that. And then the other thing is that I don't know when I got this idea, maybe by the time I was 20, I had this idea that the way to heal race relations in our country is through interracial marriages. I had a kind of naive idea that if people are married to one another and parenting children together, that will somehow, I suppose, magically, automatically create a depth of understanding, compassion, and harmony, which I now know does not naturally occur even with the best of intentions. And I'll just add, without minimizing anything about the realities of race, diversity, and inclusion, that in a fundamental way, I think every marriage is a bicultural relationship, that every marriage navigates variations on difference in identity and norms, and it is often not harmonious. So that I could go on, but I don't want to take more time just spelling the context. But these are some of the different ways that I'm inviting you, as you listen, to hear what's being said. I think it's so easy and wrong when it comes to conversations about race or conversations about conflict or even conversations about culture to think, well, that's for that political situation or that's for that dramatic situation. And I really think these lessons belong in the minor, everyday, somewhat mundane interactions as well. And so if you're listening, no matter what your circumstance, there's going to be a lot here that's relevant for you.
Thank you. I'm so glad you set that up. There was so much that I can resonate with and do resonate with. And the first thing that I want to start off with is that the reason that I like conflict is because I've been so privileged to be in the room helping people have the kinds of conversations that only happened because there was conflict. And it just allows people, I like to say, conflict presents an opportunity, and often it presents an opportunity to take it away another layer. And particularly if you're talking about intimate relationships and marriages, that you are there as a team, as partnership. And some folks say as one, although we know each person has to be their own person, but in ways that we act as one. And in order to do that, you really do need to get to know and understand each other. And no matter how much you love someone, no one comes to the table and just gives it all up and tells you all the deep, dark, or even the buttons that get pushed and the reasons why and the scars and the traumas. Nobody just comes and gives that up. And part of the reason is because we don't all know, right? When our buttons get pushed, sometimes we don't even know what just happened. Why did that
bother me so much?
Right. We don't know that. We're searching for it ourselves. So we can't come to the table and just give it to you. But when it hits that it's a conflict between us, there's that opportunity to understand one another and to deeply search ourselves for what is happening. So, yeah, I love conflict because of that, because, oh my goodness, I can't even tell you how many times I've been to tears at the conversations that folks have because the conflict came up and they were able to use the skills to really get through and talk with one another and get to another side. I have the privilege to, my 21-year-old son is living with me, and he is not just a talker, but he is an empath, and he feels things so deeply. And we definitely have times of conflict, and in those times, it's tough. I feel the emotions coming up, and I'm not the hider that I used to be. I'm not the one that's going to run away from it. I just really want to get to the other side, but I don't want to get to the other side and rush. Let's just resolve this. I want to get to the other side to really understand him and myself and what happened, right? Why did this go this way? And it's been absolutely incredible. And for the piece for my husband, I think the biggest piece is that by the time that you heard me speak about him, we had developed a real friendship partnership, particularly around our sons, because there was a real need for that, which actually is in relationship to race as well, but still. And so there was this real deep connection around this friendship and what it was that we needed from each other for it to be that way and for it to be a full partnership. Because for a long time it was more on me more. And it really was difficult for me. And it was difficult to try to get him to see that, but he never stopped trying and got there, and we both laughingly acknowledged that he had gotten there. He had chosen to make some decisions on his own, and they were great. They were really great decisions. And I said, you came up with that all on your own? And he said, oh, that's cold, but it's so true. And yes, I did. And it was just a great moment, but that came as a result of a lot of different conflicts around that particular issue and continuing to come to the table with the conversation. So,
okay. So what I'm hearing as I'm thinking of it kind of like the grit that ultimately becomes a pearl. And that grit can sometimes be noxious. It can sometimes be subtle, but in any case, that it turns into a pearl that through conflict, we have access to self-awareness and a deeper understanding of our partner. So that sounds awesome. Why are we so scared of it? Or really, this is not really a theoretical question. That doesn't actually interest me as much, the why, but for someone who does feel really uncomfortable with conflict, what's one pivot they can take the next time to be able to actually harvest the opportunity a little more?
Thank you for that question. I need to say to everyone listening that I was not this way growing up. I was not taught, and that's where I go to with most people. We're not taught about the opportunity, right, of conflict. We don't have good models in it, right? I ask the question all the time of everyone that I work with, what was modeled for you around conflict? And it is rare. I think I can count on one hand in 40 years, someone who shared, I grew up with great models around conflict. My parents were great. They sat down, they talked to each other, they talked to us, and we were really able to get through it. No, that's not most people's story. So understand right there that we haven't seen it in however we grew up and whoever we grew up with. So that's the first place, is to look at what is it that you learned from the people who modeled conflict for you, and what is it that you have retained that actually is not working for you. Now, it may be difficult for you to say that this doesn't work for me, because if you're hiding all the time and avoiding it, that has made you think that that is working for you. But the reality is this bringing you closer to the person, is the question that you want to ask. And what might do that? And the answer is to try your best to engage in conversation, right, with this person, because most of the time we're getting the same results when we have conflict, because we're doing the same thing. Both people, or at least one person's doing the same thing, and so it ends the same way all the time.
It's like a hamster wheel of conflict.
That's right. And you really want to be able to your goal is to get closer. So what's going to get me closer? Is it me being more vulnerable and sharing something that might open them up? Is it me giving the invitation to listen to whatever they might want to share without interrupting them and without judging it, but simply trying to really understand it and where it comes from for them, and then be able to have a conversation? I don't know which one is the best for you, but pick one of those and really go in with the intention. And then understand that if there's a lot of history of really badly done conflict and bad feelings as a result, that it takes time to work through that. So the first time that you become vulnerable, yeah, it's tough. And yeah, you might get your feelings hurt and then feel like withdrawing again, because here it is. I tried, I was vulnerable, and you stepped on me. The truth is, you've got to be able to sit in whatever that is and try again. Maybe it's not that same time, that moment, but it is something that you're going to need to come back to if you're in a relationship, right? If you're in an intimate relationship, you got to get intimate. and there's a lot of different ways to do that. And one of those ways is through conversation when conflict happens.
Yeah. As you're speaking, I'm imagining someone who's going to try being vulnerable, staying present, and then they get maxed out before they've gotten to the other side, just raising their hand and saying, okay, I'm going to turn into a turtle now. Mm-hmm. Withdraw the head. Only the shell in view.
And know that I get it. I understand it, but it doesn't get us to know the person better, or to know ourselves better, or to get through this piece better, or this conflict better. Withdrawing just doesn't do that. And so what is it that you ultimately want? That's the question you've got to ask yourself. What do you really want? So if this were to go as good as you wanted it to go, right? What is it that you really want? Well, withdrawing, is that going to get you there? I'm going to say no. I'm going to say it's not going to get you there. So you got to go for what it is you really want and be able to help the other person buy into that agreement as well. Why are we here? What are we doing this for? Right? It's really to be in relationship and better relationship with each other.
Yeah, hearing you, I'm actually inspired that the same way that I think it's really important to have conversations about sex, not when you're having sex, not when either of you is naked, not when you've just had sex, but when you have, a cup of coffee, you're fully clothed and both of you are calm, it's essential to be able to start your conversations about sex there. And similarly with conflict, that there's a lot of ways that it could be set up and people could share what they learned about conflict from childhood before actually engaging in a particular conflict, that would be supportive.
Yeah, absolutely. And even after, if it's gone, either way, if it's gone well or if it's gone badly, not directly after, but as you said, cup of coffee, tea, whatever your thing is, and you're in a space of calmness and being able to say, I don't know if I ever shared this with you, but here's how folks who raised me or did conflict. And I think, that's a piece that's coming up for me. I don't think I ever asked you how. That's a beautiful conversation because you then end up with a better understanding. So that's why this happens, right? A lot of times, not even a lot of times, I'm gonna say most of the time what happens in conflict is you are not in conflict with your spouse or your significant other, your loved person, right, in your marriage. You're not in conflict with them, you're in conflict with their conflict history. Somebody did something that you are triggering up that experience for them. And you've got to be able to understand what that experience is in order for you to be able to say, be fully present with me, right? And know in this moment exactly what I'm saying, what I'm feeling, and what this conflict is about, because you're not them.
Yeah. So hearing you say this may be an inelegant segue, but it's very genuine. Hearing you say there's kind of a merging of the present moment and the personal historical. And I'd like to broaden the conversation to the cultural historical. Like, how about if one of us is an immigrant or both from different countries or from the same or race, and of course having different races or the same race really only tells you a little bit because there's so many individual experiences. How do we bring that in the context of partnership?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I hope the conversations, yes, you said people tend to have the conversations earlier in the marriage and then it just feel like that it's done. I want to say that it may or may not feel like it's done to both people. It an African American woman, Black woman, I can say that there are some very real and distinct pieces of being who I am racially that affect me every day. Now, having a husband who was on the same page with me as that was really helpful. And when I say on the same page as me, is that I don't mean that he was just African American. I mean that we really felt and were raised very much in the same ways. And so culturally, we had really good conversations around that. But they were always ongoing conversations because that was necessary. What happens is it seems like, hey, we love each other. Here's the way that it seems like we're different and whatever the conversation is. And then it doesn't go on anymore because sometimes the person who has dealt with and has to constantly deal with their culture, right, or their race is decided, I'm going to keep the peace because it's a lot out there in the world for me to have. I don't want to come home and then have
to deal with
conflict
this in my
around
bed
it.
too.
That's right. That's right. And so it doesn't get talked about, or there's a real there's this sentiment that, well, we're all human, or, well, let's just, if we're nice and kind to each other. And you really kind of brought that in, right, with this piece about interracial marriages that you thought, and you are not alone in that, and people that have said that to me. Well, I think this generation is going to really get it right because they're into marrying. And it is truly not that simple. But there is that sentiment that it is. And the truth is, when we're talking about the kinds of systems that are in place that make sure that people who look like me do not succeed as easily as people who look like you, we're not talking about someone who went in and shot up a church full of Black people, someone white, right? That is horrific and that is racism, but that is episodic. If we just had different episodes, it'd be a lot easier to deal with. But this is about every single system that we need to live. So whether you're talking about the economic system, education, right? Whether we're talking about housing and healthcare, you name one, environmental, it's all sitting on a foundation of racism. And I know for some people, it's like, what? But believe me, that's what it is. And so when
Which means we're all profoundly impacted and impacting whether we know it or not.
That is correct. And there is a real there's a reality that most white people really don't know this or don't see it happening, because the system is designed to set up white as the norm that we all should be chasing after, looking like, sounding like, right, working like, all of those things. And at the same time, those who are not white are set up to believe, because of that, there's something wrong with us. There's something less than, and it's okay with folks that exists. And I will say that can absolutely affect a marriage, and as much love as you have for one another. Without those conversations, what tends to happen is the person who is most negatively affected by racism would rather be quiet, keep the peace, or may have even been taught that themselves, right? Don't bring it up. It's okay. You can get past it as long as you love each other. And that is not the answer to how we dissolve, how we dismantle and address racism.
I have what could sound like a really dumb question, but it arises for me in the way our conversation has unfolded. So I'm also putting aside the episodic, egregious, unequivocally racist events and attitudes, and transitioning more into a marriage where two people love one another and race is an invisible or visible issue, or interactions with my neighbor. In other words, things where on the surface it seems like everything is fine, in quotes, but the systemic issues that you named are at play. In leaning into anti-racism, do we necessarily find conflict there? Or is there a way to do anti-racism work which is, I'm going to say, more gentle? And I'm really asking, like, the question under my question is, do we all need to understand and become skillful and learn and prioritize our capacity to be present in conflict in a loving, authentic way that doesn't push anything under the rug, but really gets us to the other side with more connection. Is that also the journey of anti-racism, or would you distinguish it?
The work that I do, I have a program that I started 4 years ago called On the Matter of Race. It was started as a request by two women who identify as white, who were in Jen Kemp's group. That's where we met and were clients of mine doing conflict resolution coaching. And we were on a Jen Kem retreat, and they said, I'd love to work with you again, but I'd really love to know if you have any interest in putting together a program for people like us who this is the first time in our lives. We grew up in all white communities. We chose to live in those. And now in this business community, in Jen Kem community, it's very diverse. And for the first time in our lives, we are having friendships with people of color. And we hear them talk about racism and what they're experiencing all the time. And either we don't know what they're talking about or we don't believe them. And we know it's not them. We know it's us. And we really want the opportunity to learn about racism and to be able to do something about it. So I know in my program On the Matter of Race, which I created as a result of that conversation, I come in love, but I'm going to tell you that this is not a journey without conflict. You can't have the history that we have just in this country alone, because racism is global, but just in the United States alone, you can't have the history that we have with racism and think that everybody is going to come to the conversation without some feelings and without some words that are going to create conflict. And folks want gentle. They do, especially white people really want gentle. And I don't think there's anybody who's more gentle than me. And at the same time, I'm real. I'm going to say what I need to say to you in love in a way that I'm hopeful that you can hear it, but I'm not going to back down on it. And the reality is that all of us are capable of learning the skills to sit in our feelings, to really feel them, and to work our way through them, and to understand that people come to the conversation in very different ways. And as a result, it doesn't feel good some of the time. On the other hand, just to have the experience of the conversation and people to understand what's going on, that feels really healing, not just good. That feels really healing. And the way that On the Matter of Race is set up, it is only for white people. And that is specific for me because I can tell you that I know my family, the extended family, we talk about racism. It affects every one of our lives. We gather together as Black people, as African Americans, and talk about racism. And my experience with white people is that there is not that community of ongoing conversations where white people actually talk about it and really look at how it enacts itself and what is the role of white people in helping to address and to dismantle it. That's most white people can't find folks that are having those constant conversations. So I wanted to create that space. And it has been such a healing space, even though for me and my youngest son has come in, he came in last year. And it's difficult to talk about and teach about the historical nature of racism and all of the horrific acts that have happened. But at the same time, it is very healing to ask folks to go within and to look at how it has affected them as white people, right? And then for us to talk about how it affects us as African Americans. And we're not just talking about African Americans in this space, but because we are both African American, that's the experience that we come from. But I bring in speakers from other cultures who talk about their experience. But to be able to be heard and believed, and then for us to continue to learn from each other, that has been a very healing thing. And no, it's not gentle all the time. Most of the time it's not gentle, but it is loving. And I'm not one, I come from a culture where loving could mean a whole host of things that I didn't particularly like. That's not the loving I'm talking about. I'm truly talking about loving conversation.
Yeah, and I certainly don't aspire to gentleness there. It's more, I've never really thought about this in the way that I am during this conversation, how, well, actually, I have, but not this explicitly, that to really navigate conflict with your spouse and learn how to create connection through that conflict is equipping someone to be a more anti-racist presence in the world. Now, that's not the motivation to do it necessarily, and it's also not necessarily the most direct route. But I'm appreciating that the partnered outcomes of your work and my work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that too, because yes, one of the things that I truly believe is that uh, we have taken diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging to a space of people having to participate in workshops. And I think workshops are good, but what happens before the workshop is more important to me. And that is that folks do not get workshops on conflict resolution. And so they go into this space that's filled with conflict already, just coming in. Everybody's got a whole different, people are scared. People are tired of talking about this. People are wanting to hoping that people get it this time, to people who are just like, oh my gosh, right? All of that's already present before one word is spoken. And yet we're not equipping people to go into that kind of conversation with conflict resolution skills. So yes, you're right. In really learning to listen and really learning to do that deep dive and going through for understanding, really learning what feelings come up in us and how do you sit with the ones that just make you feel awful and come through it in order to have an even better conversation. Like, we're not learning any of that before we go into these conversations around racism, gender, any of this, right? And for me, those skills are invaluable. So if you learn that and have those conversations in a marriage, then yes, if when you're ready to sit and learn about racism, you are better equipped to stay in the conversation, to stay in the learning. And I will say that most people who are in interracial marriages come to on the matter of race. Most white people come to on the matter of race when they have children and recognize that, wow, I'm not prepared as a white parent to really be able to have the conversations that will help my child who is biracial, right? To navigate the world, because that's when it starts to hit them, is when they see how the world responds to a child who doesn't look white, who looks like they are definitely biracial, whether it's black and white, whether it's Asian, it doesn't matter. That's when folks will usually come to me, or they will decide that, you know what, I can save them. I'm going to raise them as white, which that's a whole nother story that does so much more harm in my view, because that's only one piece of who they are. And if the world sees them in particular as black or brown, the world is not going to treat them as someone who is white, even when they see their parents.
Yeah, so on the matter of race, who is it for? Is it for anyone who's white who wants to do better? Who is it really for?
It's for white people who are in positions of leadership, right? Because if you are in a setting where you're leading other people, there is more and more diversity, not in the numbers that people want, but there are. And so if you are really not equipped with the knowledge about how racism operates, then your leadership capabilities are not as good as they could be, because people do deal with this. Now, I will say that people can come into the workplace and say, you know what, I'm not going to talk about this. I'm not going to bring it here. I don't want to do that. But it doesn't withdraw your responsibility as a white leader to really understand and know about these things, right? So even something simple as that we had to pass the Crown Act, which said that we could wear our hair natural in corporate settings without being discriminated against and told that it's unprofessional. Even something like that, which is huge, which may sound small to someone who's white and has not had that experience. It's hair. Why are we talking about hair? But hair in our community is so crucial to who we are, and the history of us being crucified for our hair, and having to make our hair look presentable and straight. That in itself is a whole 5 or 6 lessons, right? So people in leadership positions, particularly we have people who come from HR or are DEI leaders, because most DEI leaders, the highest number of DEI leaders are white. And so having that knowledge is important. Parents, if you're a parent we have parents who come in, I want to raise good allies, right? And telling my kids to just be nice to people or to don't see color, that's not going to help to address racism. So how do I teach my children to be allies? How do I be in a marriage where my partner, right, is not white and I am, right? So we have people who just really want to have a real understanding of what it is that they're missing, because that's the other thing is I have friends of color and I'm missing something. And either they don't talk about it around me because they feel like I won't get it, or they are talking about it around me and they're right, I don't get it. So I want to be someone as a white person who really wants to do my part in not just understanding it, but working to address and dismantle it in all parts of life. So it's open for folks who are open for that. It's not open for folks who want to come and challenge me and say, everybody Black doesn't believe like you, or society is mean to one another historically, so we all get it. And if that's the space that you're in, you're not ready yet. But if the space that you're in is also the genuine curiosity, like what's going on that truly I don't understand, or truly after murder after murder, after police incidents, after Black Lives Matter getting out in the streets and people of all different races and nationalities getting out there with them, like I know that there's something, and I'm not seeing it. If that's the space that you're in too, the space to be like you, where you said, I know this is going to sound like a dumb question, but I'm going to ask it. Yeah, that's the space for On the Matter of Races. We're here for the dumb questions, because where else are you going to ask them and then get some kind of answer that can give you a clue as to why it is folks of color are so angry about this, or so tired, or keep raising it, right? I hear the expression like that. Why do Black people make everything about race? And my dear, I will say the answer is because everything is. And when you know and have studied racism, you will understand that answer.
It sounds like such a generous program. And while you're speaking, I'm imagining a world where this is standard curriculum for all second graders, but in the meantime, it's not. And so we need to invest and get ourselves this education if life hasn't otherwise provided it. So I just think it is so amazing. Do you want to say how someone would sign up? We'll have all that information in the show notes, but it's nice to hear it from you directly as well.
Absolutely. You can. We are looking for level one folks. Level one folks are folks who just, you starting at that level. I've got questions. I've not really done the work. Maybe I've read a book or a couple of books, and maybe I've actually hung a Black Lives Matter sign, and but didn't know what to do beyond that. So if you go to LynneMaureenHurdle.com, you will see on the matter of race. Hopefully you will, as you said, Alex, the link will be posted so you can see that. And then what it is everybody has to sign up for an interview. That's the way also that I not only create safety for myself and my son as co-facilitators, but I create safety for the group that we get to sit with and talk with and question folks why of even wanting to do this, that folks are sitting with us for a full hour before we determine whether this is right for you. We don't want you to just put down your money. People can do that, and then we don't know who we're getting and why. But you sign up for an interview, and then if we feel like this is right for you, then you go on from there to invest in it. And it's a 6-month journey. And people start out, good God, 6 months. At the end of the 6 months, I better know everything, because 6 months is a long time. And I can tell you every single time, it's been 4 years, every single time the journey comes to the week before it's over, people are like, what do you mean?
There's so much more yet to do.
Where did the 6 months go? Well, it went because we are really learning and talking, and people are so committed to showing up and doing the work. It's a journey like no other. So I hope that we will have folks who will come. Our next one starts May 15th, and I hope we'll have folks who will really come and be interested in finding out who we are and then want to sign up.
Yeah, I think this is incredibly important, and I've rearranged the schedule so when you're listening, you have time to apply, have your interview, which I'm sure is a super enlightening experience unto itself, and then join the May 15th cohort. And I look forward from everyone who does that, how your community, your workplace, your family, and your marriage benefit from doing this work. I am so grateful you've joined me for this conversation. And actually, just before we wrap up, I ask everyone on the podcast, because for me, intimate relationships are the ultimate vehicle for personal growth. And I wonder if you would share one thing that you've learned about yourself as a result of having been married to your incredible husband.
Yeah, and we were married 31 years.
31 years, yeah.
Yeah. What I've learned about myself is that as much as I learn about conflict resolution and use the skills, it is still challenging to go into the conversations. And I love that about myself, because I know that it is a challenge, and I'm willing to say it's worth that challenge. And I'm going to tell you, that is a huge change for me, who grew up pushing down every single thought, feeling, and never speaking up. And now absolutely, it is something that I am totally committed to, and I enjoy that kind of conversation. Yeah, so that's something I found out about me, is that as much as I do it, it's still like, okay, let's go.
Okay, I love that. You're reminding me, I haven't really told my story that is similar in terms of being super anti-conflict. And now I look forward to it, because there are things that arise that we don't otherwise get to know about one another. So, Lynne, thank you so much for your juiciness, your depth, your eloquence, and your generosity.
Oh, it is my pleasure. And I hope your listeners experienced something that they found valuable.
I am sure.